On the night I buried my mother, my father took me to his bed, saying it was so I wouldn't feel alone. It was the beginning of 10 years of silent terror. When I finally understood what that special affection was, it was already too late. But sometimes fate charges interest on what was taken from us. Good afternoon, my dear viewers. What a joy to be here with you again in this special corner of the internet. I'm Hannah Montgomery, 73 years old and living in Burlington, Vermont, the beautiful town that welcomed me after life took me on so many turns. Today the sky is clear, with a blue that reminds me of summer days from my childhood. I'm sitting here on my porch, with my knitting in my lap and a cup of hot tea beside me, looking at the flowers in my small garden. The dahlias are beautiful this time of year. Did you know that? Every morning when I wake up, the first thing I do is open the curtains and admire how generous nature is, even when life hasn't always been. Every day I make sure to sit in this rocking chair that my late husband August gave me almost 30 years ago. It's not one of those modern ones, no. It's one of those old ones, solid wood, that creaks a little when you rock, but it's a pleasant creak, you know? As if the chair were talking to me, telling me the stories it has witnessed. It was in this very chair that I started recording these videos for you. My granddaughter Claire had the idea. "Grandma," she told me one day, "your stories are so important, you should share them with more people." At first, I was embarrassed. Imagine, a lady my age appearing on the internet. But then I realized that maybe, just maybe, my experiences could help someone out there. And look what happened. It's been almost 2 years of sharing a little bit of my life with you. Each comment I receive is like a warm hug, you know? I cherish them all in my heart. My Claire helps me read all of them, and sometimes I even cry with emotion seeing how many beautiful people I've met because of this little cell phone. Today I want to talk about something I kept inside myself for many years. It's not an easy story to tell, but I've learned that the most difficult stories are precisely those that most need to be heard. It's about shadows from the past, about pains we carry in silence, but also about liberation. And you, my dears who are watching me now, tell me here in the comments, from what little town or city are you watching me? And at what time of day did you find this video? Is it early morning with that hot coffee, after lunch taking a little rest, or already at night preparing to sleep? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Let me know, okay? Let's create a chain of caring. You know, my story begins many years ago, when I was still a girl with pigtails and a polka dot dress. A time when the world seemed bigger and scarier, especially when we lose those who protect us. It was a time of darkness, but it was also the beginning of a journey that brought me here, sitting in this chair, sharing pieces of my soul with you. It's not easy to go back to these moments, but as my grandmother Irene used to say, we only free ourselves from what we have the courage to face head-on. And today, my dears, I'm going to face one of the most painful parts of my life. I'll tell you about a time when hands that should protect became the source of my greatest fear. But I'll also tell you how I found strength where I thought there was only weakness. So make yourselves comfortable, grab a coffee or tea like mine, and let's travel together down this road of memories. Because some stories, even the most difficult ones, need to be told so that others don't have to be lived. I was born in Millfield, a small town on the border with Pennsylvania. It was a small place where everybody knew everybody. It was a pretty place, with those colorful little houses and the Millfield River winding alongside. My father, Ernest Montgomery, worked as a carpenter, had his own workshop in the back of our house. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered with large hands calloused from working with wood. My mother, Ida, was a seamstress, a good one. She made wedding dresses that were sought after by girls even from other towns. Our house was simple but always tidy. It had a long hallway connecting the living room to the 3 bedrooms. Mine was small, with a window overlooking the backyard. On the walls, my mother had put up flowery wallpaper that she chose herself. I loved counting the flowers while waiting for sleep to come. There was a large backyard, with a peach tree that gave fruit so sweet the smell spread throughout the whole neighborhood when they were ripe. We were a common family back then. Dad worked all day in the workshop, Mom sewed and took care of the house, and my brother Ted, 2 years older than me, and I would walk together to school in the morning. Ted was always the protector, held my hand on the cobblestone streets, and defended me when some boy picked on me. Our routine was simple and predictable. We'd wake up early, have breakfast with homemade bread and peach jam that Mom made. Then we'd go to school. At lunch, we were all together at the table. Dad insisted on this family moment. "It's at bread and table that you know a man's character," he always said. In the afternoon, we'd play in the yard or help with household chores. Ted liked to stay in the workshop with Dad, learning the trade. I preferred to stay close to Mom, watching her sew, her delicate fingers guiding the fabric under the needle of the machine. On Sunday afternoons, we'd walk to the central square. Dad would buy ice cream for us, and we'd watch the movement, the families walking, the courting couples. Mom would always wear a pretty dress on these days, usually a light blue one that Dad said matched her eyes. And they walked hand in hand like two sweethearts. In those moments, I thought we were the happiest family in the world. I had my little friends from school, Nancy and Celia. We played Ring Around the Rosie house and school. Nancy lived nearby, across the street, and sometimes slept over at our house when her parents went to some engagement in the neighboring town. We'd make little tents with sheets stretched between chairs and tell spine-tingling stories using a flashlight under our faces. Life was simple, but good. Until I was 10, my biggest worry was whether it would rain on the day of the school field trip, or if there would be a piece left of the orange cake Mom made on Saturdays. But fate has these things, of changing everything when we least expect it. It started with a cough that Mom couldn't control. At first, she said it was nothing, just a silly little cold. But soon she started losing weight, getting more tired. The sewing started taking longer. Some clients had to look for another seamstress because Mom couldn't keep up. I remember Dad getting nervous about this. "Ida, you need to go to the doctor," he'd say. But in those days, going to the doctor was almost a luxury. Only when things were really bad. And when she finally went, it was already too late. Tuberculosis, they said. In those days, there weren't the treatments of today. And Mom, always so full of life, withered before our eyes like a little flower without water. The day she left us, the sky was so blue it seemed like a provocation. How could it be so beautiful outside when inside our house there was only pain? I had just turned 11 years old. Ted was 13. Dad was like an empty shell, sitting on the edge of the bed where Mom had passed, looking at his hands as if seeking some answer in them. The funeral was simple, but the whole town showed up. Mom was loved by everyone. They formed a line to offer their condolences, and I could only think that I wanted everyone to go away, to leave me alone with my grief. Ted stayed tough, holding back tears, but I saw when he hid behind the shed and cried until he sobbed. We returned home, and the silence was like a living presence. Dad didn't say anything, but he started drinking more. He always had his drink after work, but now it was different. He'd drink until late, sometimes falling asleep right there in the living room. The workshop began receiving fewer orders because he didn't deliver on time. Money got tight, and with it, patience too. Ted tried to help as best he could. He learned to cook some basic things, took care of me when Dad was indisposed. But he was also just a boy, and soon things got even worse for us. It was a week after the funeral. I couldn't sleep in my room alone. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I'd hear Mom's cough in the next room, and when I remembered I'd never hear it again, the tears would come. That night, it was especially difficult. The wind hit the window, making a strange noise, as if someone was scratching to get in. I got up from the bed and went to Ted's room, but he wasn't there. I later found out he had gone to sleep at our Uncle Jeremy's house to help with some farm work the next day. I stood in the dark hallway, afraid to go back to my room, but even more afraid to stay there. That's when the door to Dad's room opened. He was standing there, his silhouette cut out by the dim light of the oil lamp he kept lit. "Hannah? What is it, girl? Can't sleep?" he asked. His voice was different, slurred because of the drink. I shook my head, holding back tears. "You miss your mother, don't you?" "So do I," he said, and then made the invitation that would change everything. "Come, sleep here with your dad tonight. That way neither of us will be alone." That night, something in his look should have warned me. But I was just a girl with a heart broken by the loss of my mother. How could I know what that invitation really meant? How could I imagine that, by lying in that bed, I was entering a cage from which it would take years to escape? That first night in Dad's room was strange, but not in the way it would come to be later. He laid me in the bed that used to be theirs, Mom's and his, and he laid down on the other side, leaving a space between us. He smelled of whiskey and sweat, but also of the linseed oil he used on the wood. I stared at the ceiling, at the same place where Mom must have looked so many times. "You know, daughter," he said in the dark, "sometimes God takes what we love most to see if we still know how to love." I didn't answer. I was thinking about Mom, if she could see us from where she was, if she knew how much we were suffering without her. "Now it's just the three of us," Dad continued. "We have to take care of each other." I slept restlessly, but I slept. When I woke up, Dad had already gotten up and was in the kitchen making coffee. The smell of brewed coffee was comforting, as if a little piece of the routine from before was still there. Ted arrived from Uncle Jeremy's house and looked strangely at me when he saw me coming out of Dad's room. He didn't say anything, but I saw his eyes narrow. I thought it would be just that one night, that it was a momentary comfort for two people in mourning. But the next night, when I was preparing to sleep in my room, Dad appeared at the door. "Come, daughter," he said. "It's not good to be alone with your thoughts at your age." And so it began. One night turned into two turned into a week, and soon there was no more invitation. It was simply where I slept now. Ted continued to find it strange, but what could he say? It was our father, the man who supported us, who took care of us now that Mom was no longer there. At first, it was just lying side by side. Sometimes he cried softly, thinking I was asleep. I felt sorry for him, for his pain. But soon I realized that the drink was changing something in him. He came home later and later from Ed's store, staggering through the hallways. And in the dark of the room, his sobs of crying were transforming into something else. The first time I felt his hand on me was like a shock. I had just turned 11 years and 2 months. I pretended I was asleep, breathing slow and rhythmically, while my heart was beating so hard I thought he could hear it. They were large and rough hands, calloused from working with hard woods, hands that I once admired, seeing them create beauty from raw trunks. Now, in the dark, those same hands moved in a way I didn't completely understand, but that caused me deep discomfort, a knot in my throat, a desire to flee. "It's just a caress," he whispered, more to himself than to me. Every father gives his daughter caresses. His hot, sour whiskey breath reached me, and I curled up even more, pretending a deep sleep, while silent tears ran down my face and wet the pillow. In the following mornings, he acted normally. He prepared coffee, gave money for bread, asked about school, as if nothing had happened. And I, at first, almost believed I had dreamed, that those caresses were nightmares caused by the sadness of losing Mom. But then night would come again. "Everyone has a family secret," he told me once, while his hands traveled to places where they should never be. "This is our secret, Hannah. If you tell anyone, they'll take you and Ted away, and then what? Who will take care of you?" Fear paralyzed me. Fear of being separated from my brother, fear of going to an unknown place, fear that no one would believe me against the word of an adult respected in the community. And God forgive me, fear of hurting my own father, whom, despite everything, I still loved in some confused and painful way. Ted began to look at me differently, not with anger, but with sad confusion. He was 13, entering adolescence, beginning to understand things I still didn't fully comprehend. Once, he tried to talk to me. "Hannah," he said softly while we were alone in the yard, "why are you sleeping in Dad's room?" "It's because I'm afraid to sleep alone," I answered, my eyes fixed on the packed dirt beneath my feet. "And does he treat you well there?" His voice faltered a bit. I couldn't answer, just shrugged. Ted was silent for a long time, then said, "If he does anything that makes you sad or afraid, you tell me, okay? Promise?" I promised, but it was an empty promise. How could I tell? How to put into words something I didn't quite understand myself? The months passed and the situation got worse. The caresses became more invasive, more painful, more frightening. I developed strategies. I pretended to be sick, waited for him to drink until he fell asleep, tried to sleep in Ted's room when Dad went out at night. But there was always a night when I couldn't escape. At school, my grades began to fall. I couldn't concentrate. I was always tired. Miss Lenora noticed the change. "Hannah, is something happening at home?" she asked once after class. I shook my head, but she didn't seem convinced. "You know you can count on me, don't you? For anything." I almost told her that day, almost let it all out. But then I remembered his words. Our secret. And what would happen if I talked? So I swallowed the tears and said I was just missing my mother. Time passed differently at night. The minutes dragged on as I waited for him to fall asleep. I learned to recognize his heavy breathing when finally the alcohol overcame him. Only then could I relax a little, huddled at the edge of the bed, as far away from him as possible. I began to hate myself, to hate my body that was beginning to change, to hate the mirror that showed me a girl I no longer recognized. I began to wear baggy clothes, to hide inside them. I stopped playing with my friends, going to school parties. Any touch, even innocent, scared me. But the worst part wasn't the nights. The worst part was how it was changing the way I saw the world. When I observed other families in the square on Sundays, I kept wondering, are there also hidden secrets there? Does that father, smiling at his daughter while pushing her swing, also transform at night? It was on one of those Sunday afternoons, almost a year after it all began, that I had a kind of revelation. We were in the square, as was customary, but now it was different. Dad no longer bought ice cream for us. He was always irritated or distant. Ted barely stayed at home anymore. He spent more and more time at Uncle Jeremy's house. And I was there, sitting on a bench, observing people. I saw a father with his daughter. She must have been about my age, maybe 12 years old. He hugged her, lovingly messed up her hair, and put her on his shoulders so she could see something better that was happening on the other side of the square. And in her eyes, instead of fear, there was pure joy, complete trust. It was as if a curtain had been torn in front of me. Suddenly, I saw clearly what was happening to me wasn't normal. It wasn't affection. It wasn't a father's love. It was something else, something dirty, wrong, that was destroying me inside every night. A father's true love looked like what I was seeing now: protection, respect, shared joy. And at that moment, something changed inside me. The confusion gave way to painful certainty. Fear began to share space with another feeling: anger. A deep anger that burned slowly, like the embers in my father's workshop when he forged his metal pieces. An anger that, little by little, would transform into something even more dangerous: determination. That night, when he came back drunk and his large, calloused hands began to move in the dark, I didn't close my eyes. For the first time, I looked directly at him. He didn't notice, he was too drunk. But I noticed something. He was no longer an invincible giant in my eyes. He was just a weak man, broken by pain, seeking comfort in the worst possible way. And for the first time, I felt not just fear, I also felt pity. And the pity, mixed with anger, began to give me strength. One day, I thought, as he finally fell into the heavy sleep of drunkenness. One day this will end. I still didn't know how or when, but the seed was planted. I was only 12 years old, but at that moment, something adult and dangerous began to grow inside me, something that would wait patiently for the right moment. The next 2 years were a nightmare that seemed to have no end. The more time passed, the bolder and more careless Dad became. What used to happen only in the dark of night, protected by the secret of the room, began to happen at other times, when Ted wasn't home, in the kitchen, when I was washing dishes, in the dark hallway when I came back from the bathroom. His large and rough hand always found a way to reach me, to trap me, to hurt me. The alcohol made everything worse. It wasn't just on weekends anymore. Now he started drinking right after lunch. The orders at the carpentry shop fell even more. Customers complained about poorly finished furniture, deadlines not met. Our financial situation became critical. Sometimes there was no food on the table. Ted, then 15 years old, started working with Uncle Jeremy on the farm to bring some money home. At this time, Ted already suspected that something very wrong was happening. He observed me with a sad and helpless look. Once, he entered the room while Dad was giving me caresses, as he called it. It was a terrible moment. Dad jumped up staggering and yelled at Ted to get out. The two argued badly, and for a moment I thought they were going to hurt each other. Ted had grown, but Dad was still stronger. In the end, Ted left, slamming the door, and I heard when he also slammed the front door. He stayed away for 2 days. When he came back, he tried to convince me to go with him to Uncle Jeremy's house. "We can run away, Hannah," he said, his eyes burning with determination. "Uncle Jeremy will understand when I tell him. He can help us." But fear paralyzed me. "What if he doesn't believe us?" I asked. "What if Dad comes to get us? What if they separate us? What if—" I couldn't finish. Ted hugged me, and I felt his thin body trembling against mine. He was afraid, too. He was just a boy trying to protect his younger sister. "Then I'll save up money," he decided. "I'll work more, save everything, and when I have enough, we'll go to Philadelphia. I have a friend who went there, said there's work. I'll get you out of here, Hannah. I promise." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to so badly. But the nights continued, relentless, and with them, the caresses that made me sick inside. It was at this time that people in town started talking. Small towns have eyes in every corner, and neighbors noticed the changes. They noticed that I no longer smiled, that I always walked looking at the ground. They noticed that Dad drank more and more, that Ted always had dark circles, always working to make up for what Dad no longer did. Miss Lenora called me again after class. "Hannah," she said, gently placing her hand on my shoulder, a touch that made me instinctively shrink. "I'm very concerned about you. I know you lost your mother, that it's been difficult. But there's something else happening, isn't there? You can trust me." I almost told her everything that day. Her eyes were so kind, so sincere. But then I thought about Ted, about our plan to save money and run away. If I spoke, maybe everything would get even worse. Maybe they wouldn't even believe me. So I just cried without saying anything, and she hugged me in silence. At home, things reached the lowest point in the winter of my 13th year. Dad completely lost control. The workshop was practically abandoned. He spent his days at the store, drinking, and came home at night, beside himself. Sometimes he couldn't even reach the bedroom. He passed out in the living room. Those were the only nights I could sleep in peace. Ted, desperate, worked more and more, assuming the role of provider for the house. He was only 15 years old, but he already looked like an adult, with his thin face and always tired eyes. Our relationship became strange, tense. He wanted to protect me, but he couldn't always be present. And when he wasn't, Dad took advantage. One night, Ted came home earlier than expected. Dad was in the kitchen, pressing me against the sink, his hands going under my blouse while I cried silently. Ted saw everything. What happened next was a blur. I remember screams, furniture being knocked over. I remember Ted, my skinny 15-year-old brother, jumping on our father trying to hit him. And I remember the sound of something breaking, a bottle, and the blood. So much blood. Dad had broken a bottle of whiskey on Ted's head. My brother fell, bleeding heavily. I ran to him, screaming, but Dad pulled me by the arm so hard I thought it would break. "He tried to kill me," Dad shouted. "I'm calling the police. I'm going to have this bastard locked up." At that moment, something broke inside me. It wasn't just fear or anger. It was pure hatred. A hatred I had never felt before. "If you call the police," I said, my voice strangely calm, "I'll tell them everything you do to me. Everything." He stared at me, his eyes red and swollen, his unshaven beard, the smell of drink permeating everything. For a moment, I saw fear in his eyes. Fear of a 13-year-old girl. And that gave me a power I had never felt before. Ted needed stitches in his head. We made up a story for the doctor, that he had fallen and hit his head on the corner of the table. No one completely believed it, but no one questioned much either. That's how things worked in small towns back then. After that, Ted was never the same. Something had broken inside him, too. 2 weeks later, he took his few things and left home. "I'm going to Philadelphia," he told me while packing a small bag. "I'll work, rent a room, and then I'll come get you. I promise, Hannah. I won't leave you here forever." I cried a lot that day. I begged him to take me with him. But he explained that it would be harder to get work and housing with a 13-year-old girl. "I need to establish myself first," he said. "It'll be just for a while. I promise." And so I was left alone with Dad. Without Ted's protective presence, without anyone to interfere, things got even worse. The caresses became more violent, more frequent. There was no one at home to interrupt us anymore, no one to scream to for help. I learned to disconnect during those moments, to send my mind far away while my body was trapped there. I imagined I was in the square, eating ice cream with Mom and Ted, or at the river where we used to fish in the summers before everything fell apart. I created entire worlds inside my head where I was safe, protected, loved in the right way. But reality always came back. And with it, the pain, the shame, the feeling of being completely alone in the world. Months passed without news from Ted. I began to fear that he had forgotten me, that he had moved on with his life and left me behind. Or worse, that something bad had happened to him. Philadelphia was a big and dangerous city for a boy from the countryside. Then, on a rainy afternoon, when I was coming back from school, I saw an envelope under the door. Inside was money, not much, but more than I had ever seen together, and a note. "I'm working in a factory. I have a rented room. It's not safe to come get you yet, but it will be soon. Hang in there. I love you. T." That note gave me strength to endure a few more months. I kept the money in a hiding place I made under a loose board in my old room. I began to plan my escape, calculating how much I would need for the bus ticket, how long it would take to get to Philadelphia, how I would find Ted when I got there. But fate had other plans. One night, Dad came home drunker than usual. He was furious, yelling about some job that had gone wrong, some customer who refused to pay. I tried to hide in the bathroom, but he broke down the door. "It's all your fault," he shouted, though it made no sense at all. "You and your brother, you ruined my life." What happened next was a nightmare in slow motion. He dragged me to the room, tore my clothes. His hands, those large and calloused hands that once built beautiful things, now only destroyed. They destroyed my childhood, my innocence, my future. I tried to resist. For the first time, I really fought. I scratched, kicked, tried to scream. But he was much stronger, and the alcohol seemed to make him insensitive to pain. When it finally ended, he fell into a deep sleep, snoring loudly, as if nothing had happened. I lay on the bed, looking at the ceiling, at the same place where Mom must have looked so many times. And it was then that I made my decision. I wouldn't wait any longer for Ted. I couldn't bear even one more day in that house. Somehow, this needed to end. And if no one saved me, I would have to save myself. With this thought, I fell asleep. A disturbed sleep, full of nightmares. But when I woke up the next morning, something had changed. I was no longer just a frightened girl. I was a survivor with a plan. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something like hope. The morning after that terrible night, Dad left early. He didn't even look me in the eyes during breakfast, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't destroyed another piece of me the night before. His face was swollen, his eyes red, his hands trembling as he held the cup. "I'm going to work in the workshop today," he muttered. "There's a cabinet to deliver to Mr. Boniface by the end of the week." I nodded silently. I no longer cared about his plans, about his empty promises of work that rarely materialized. I just wanted him to leave, to let me breathe for a few hours. When I heard the workshop door close, I went to my hiding place and took the money Ted had sent. I counted the bills several times. Would it be enough for a ticket to Philadelphia? And how would I find my brother in such a big city? The note had no address, no indication of where he was. Fear paralyzed me again. I looked out the window and saw Dad walking towards the store, probably to buy whiskey before starting work. His walk was already unstable, even at that hour of the morning. Suddenly, I had a terrifying certainty. He wouldn't change. Never. This would continue, night after night, until when? Until I managed to run away? Until he killed me in one of his explosions of rage? Until I killed myself to escape this hell? It was then that I heard my mother's voice, so clear as if she were beside me. "Be strong, my daughter. Do what needs to be done." It wasn't really her voice, of course. It was my mind seeking strength where it could. But that gave me a clarity I didn't have before. I couldn't wait for someone to save me. Not Ted, not Miss Lenora, not the neighbors who pretended not to see what happened in our house. I had to save myself. I spent the entire day wandering around the house, restless, thinking about what to do. Would I run away that very night? Try to reach the bus station without being seen? Take the first bus away from there? But where would I go if I couldn't find Ted in Philadelphia? While these questions were spinning in my head, my feet led me to the workshop at the back of the house. It was empty. Dad had probably gone to the store and wouldn't be back so soon. I entered slowly, breathing in the familiar smell of wood, varnish, and linseed oil. This was his kingdom, the place where he transformed from a violent drunk into a respected craftsman. The tools were scattered on the bench, hammers, chisels, saws, sandpaper, and at the back, covered by a thin layer of sawdust, the bandsaw. A large old machine that Dad had bought secondhand from a carpentry shop that closed in Hartford. His pride. The bandsaw was silent now, but I knew the noise it made when turned on. A high-pitched buzzing that became a roar when the blade cut the wood. I had seen Dad use it hundreds of times, always with care, always respecting the power of the machine. "This cuts anything, Hannah," he explained to me once, in the times when he was still a real father. "That's why you have to respect it. Never touch this when I'm not with you." I looked at the machine for a long time. Something was forming in my mind, something dark and definitive. It wasn't quite a plan yet, more like a glimpse of possibility. Frightening, but also liberating. When I returned to the house, Dad had already returned. He was in the living room, a half-empty bottle beside him, snoring on the old sofa. I looked at him and felt nothing. Not fear, not anger, not hatred. Just a cold certainty that something needed to change. That night was one of the worst. He woke up around 8, already looking for me. I tried to lock myself in the bathroom, but he broke down the door again. "Come here," he ordered, dragging me to the room. "I need my special caress. I closed my eyes as his hands, those huge and calloused hands, began their terrible ritual. But this time, instead of disconnecting completely, a part of me observed, studied, memorized each movement, each habit, each weakness, like a predator studying its prey. The next morning, I couldn't go to school. My body hurt too much. My soul was in pieces. I lay there, looking at the ceiling, while I heard Dad moving around the house until he finally left. The front door slammed, and silence returned. I got up with difficulty and went to the window. I saw when he staggered to the store, as every morning. He would return drunk, try to work a little in the workshop, drink more, and at night, everything would start again. It was then that I made my decision. It wouldn't be that night. I needed a better, safer plan. I needed to study his habits, understand exactly how the bandsaw worked, how to turn it on, how to turn it off. I needed to be sure. I spent the following week observing. I went to school, came back, did what he ordered, endured the nights. But now with a purpose. Every detail was important. I discovered that every Saturday he drank more than usual. That on Saturday afternoons, when he came back from the store, he went straight to the workshop, determined to show himself that he was still capable of working. I discovered that when he drank too much, he became clumsy, reckless with the tools. He had cut himself several times, small accidents that he hid with dirty bandages, and most importantly, I discovered that he never, ever turned off the safety key of the bandsaw. "Waste of time," he grumbled when someone mentioned the danger. "I know this machine like the back of my hand." On Saturday, I woke up with a strange calm, as if my body knew that would be the last day of fear, the last day of pain. I prepared breakfast in silence, served Dad, who already seemed half drunk even at that hour of the morning. "I'm going to work on Boniface's cabinet today," he said, more to himself than to me. "I'm going to finish it today." "Yes, Dad," I replied, my voice neutral. He looked at me in surprise. It had been a long time since I had responded, since I had reacted. Perhaps he mistook my calm for submission, for acceptance. Perhaps he thought he had finally broken me completely. He left for the store as always. I waited an hour, 2. When the clock struck 3 in the afternoon, I heard the front door. Heavy, dragging footsteps. A curse when he tripped on the carpet. Then the back door opening and closing. He had gone to the workshop. I waited another half hour. My heart was beating so hard it seemed like it would come out of my mouth. My hands were trembling, but my mind was clearer than ever. Slowly, I got up and went to the kitchen. I took a glass of water, drank slowly. Then I walked to the back door, crossed the small yard, and stopped at the entrance to the workshop. He had his back to me, leaning over the bandsaw, adjusting something. The bottle of whiskey was beside him, already half empty. The strong smell of alcohol mixed with that of freshly cut wood. His large and skillful hands, despite the drunkenness, moved with a familiarity born of decades of practice. I entered silently. He didn't hear me. The old radio was playing some country music, drowning out my steps. I approached more, observing. His hands were inside the machine now, adjusting the tension of the blade. The saw was turned off, but the safety key, the one that should always be locked when making adjustments, was in the on position, as always. The safety key was on the right side of the machine, a large red round button. Just press it for the saw to come to life. I stood there, observing his hands inside the machine. Those hands that had taken my childhood, my innocence, my peace. Those hands that only brought pain and shame. Large, rough, calloused from working with wood and stained by years of alcohol. "Hannah?" His voice surprised me. He had turned around and seen me standing there. "What are you doing here, girl? I told you not to enter the workshop when I'm working." I didn't answer. I just took a step to the side, getting closer to the safety key. "Are you listening to me? Get out of here, go make dinner, and afterward..." He smiled in a way that made me freeze inside. "Afterward, we'll have our special moment, right?" It was that smile, that dirty, drunk smile, that promise of another night of terror. That's what made my hand move. A quick, decisive movement, my small hand against the large red button. The sound of the saw coming to life was deafening in the small space, the roar of the blade spinning at high speed. And then, another sound, a sound I will never forget as long as I live. His scream. It wasn't a scream of anger. It wasn't like the screams I was used to hearing when he was drunk and furious. It was a scream of pure pain, of shock, of disbelief. A scream that started deep and ended in a high-pitched squeal that didn't seem human. I pressed the emergency button almost immediately, turning off the saw. The silence that followed was more frightening than the scream. And then, the sound of something dripping on the wooden floor. Drip, 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 like rain on a tin roof. But it wasn't rain. At that moment, something strange happened to me. It was as if I watched the scene from outside my body. I saw when I ran to him, who had fallen to his knees, holding his wrists against his chest. I saw when I screamed for help. I saw when the neighbors came running, when someone called the ambulance, when they took me away, saying, "The poor little thing saw everything, take her away from here." And the whole time, a voice inside my head calmly repeated, "It's over. Finally over." The days following the accident passed like in a feverish dream. I remember being at the hospital, sitting on a hard bench in the hallway, while people came and went without noticing me. I remember the smell of disinfectant, the distant sound of voices and medical equipment. A social worker asked me questions, but I could barely answer. "It was an accident," I repeated, as if I had memorized the phrase. "He was drunk. He always left the safety key on." I don't know how long I stayed there. Hours, maybe. Until a nurse came to me and said that my father was stabilized, but that he had suffered serious injuries. The saw blade had deeply cut both wrists and hands, damaging tendons, muscles, bones. He would need several surgeries, and even then, he would never have complete movement of his hands again. "He's asking for you," said the nurse. "Do you want to see him?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to run from there, to flee as far as possible. Another part wanted to see with my own eyes that those hands, those terrible hands, were finally neutralized. "Yes," I answered after a moment. He was lying on a white bed, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen him. His arms were elevated on pillows, wrapped in thick white bandages stained with red. His face was pale, his eyes half closed, but when he saw me, they opened completely. "Hannah," he murmured, his voice hoarse. I approached slowly, like one approaches a wounded animal that can still be dangerous. I stopped at the foot of the bed, keeping my distance. "The doctor said I might never be able to work with carpentry again," he said, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. "My hands, they'll never be the same." I didn't answer. What could I say? That I was sorry? It would be a lie. At that moment, I felt absolutely nothing for him. "Did you see what happened?" he asked, looking at me again. There was a shadow of suspicion in his eyes, as if trying to remember exactly the sequence of events before the accident. "I saw," I answered simply. "The safety key was on." As always. We were silent for a long moment. Perhaps he saw something in my eyes, some trace of what had really happened. Or perhaps it was just the guilt that all alcoholics carry, that constant feeling that they did something terrible they can't remember. Either way, he looked away first. "I called your brother," said the social worker when I left the room. "We managed to locate him in Philadelphia. He's coming here. He'll arrive early tomorrow." Those words lit a small flame of hope inside me. Ted was coming back. I wouldn't be alone anymore. I spent the night at Mrs. Isaacs's house, our neighbor. I couldn't sleep, thinking about what I would say to Ted when I saw him. Would I tell the truth? The whole truth? Or would I keep that last secret just for myself? When the sun rose, I was already up, anxiously waiting. Around 9 in the morning, a car stopped in front of Mrs. Isaac's house. The door opened, and there he was. My brother, my protector. He looked older, thinner, more serious. But when he saw me, his face lit up with the same smile as always. I ran to his arms and fell apart. All the control, all the coldness I had maintained during those days dissolved in a torrent of tears. He hugged me tightly, as if wanting to make up for all the time we were separated. "I should have taken you with me," he whispered, his voice choked. "Forgive me, Hannah. Forgive me for leaving you alone with him." "You came back," I managed to say between sobs. "That's all that matters." Ted went to see our father at the hospital. I waited in the car, unable to enter that building again. When he returned, his face was serious, his lips compressed into a thin line. "He's not coming back home for a good while," he said, starting the car. "And when he returns, we won't be there." "What do you mean?" "I'm taking you with me to Philadelphia. Today. I already have a steady job at a factory, a rented room. It's not much, but it's far from him. And when he's discharged, he'll need care. The doctors have already said they'll admit him to a rehab clinic for alcoholics after the hospital. It seems Uncle Jeremy will help with that." It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I breathed without that constant feeling of fear and oppression. I was free. Finally, free. "Are you sure we can just go?" I asked, still incredulous. "The social worker has already authorized it. I'm your brother. I'm already 16 years old. I have a steady job. With the state he's in, no one will question that you stay with me. And if they try to send you back or to some shelter, we'll run away. I swear, Hannah, I'll never let anyone hurt you again." We returned to our house to get a few things. It was strange to be there without his threatening presence. I entered my old room, looked at the window overlooking the yard, at the walls with faded flowery wallpaper. I took some clothes, a photo of our mother, the money I had hidden. I didn't want anything else from that place. The workshop was locked with a padlock, a yellow police tape across the door. "Accident scene," it said. I looked one last time at that place where my life had changed forever and felt no remorse at all, just relief. The trip to Philadelphia was long. We took a bus that left at noon and only arrived at night. I looked out the window, watching the landscape change, the small towns giving way to open fields, and then the fields yielding to taller and taller buildings as we approached the big city. "It's big, isn't it?" said Ted, noticing my amazement when we finally arrived. "I was scared the first time too, but you'll get used to it, and here no one knows us. We can start over." The room Ted rented was in a boarding house in the Fishtown neighborhood, near the factory where he worked. It was small, with just a single bed, a small table, and a closet. "I'll sleep on the floor," he said, putting down a mat he had borrowed. "Tomorrow I'll start looking for a bigger place for us." That first night in Philadelphia, lying in bed while Ted slept on the floor, I stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, listening to the strange sounds of the big city. Cars, honks, distant voices. So different from the oppressive silence of the nights in Millfield. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid of the darkness. The following months were of adaptation. Ted continued working at the furniture factory, using the skill he had learned from our father for something positive. I started studying at a public school near the boarding house. At first, it was difficult. I hardly spoke. I was afraid of everyone. I got scared when someone raised their voice or made a sudden movement near me. But gradually, very slowly, I began to open up. I made a friend, Samantha, a girl with thick glasses who was also new to the school and as shy as I was. I started getting good grades, participating more in classes. The English teacher, Mrs. Rita, said I had a talent for writing, that I should develop it. Ted found a small apartment for us to rent in the Port Richmond neighborhood. Just one bedroom, a tiny living room and a kitchen, but it was ours. Our safe space, away from him. Sometimes I received news about our father through Uncle Jeremy, who called from time to time. I learned that he had left the hospital after 3 months, that he had lost much of the mobility in his hands, that he could never work as a carpenter again, that he was in the rehab clinic, trying to quit drinking, that he asked about us. I listened to everything in silence, without reaction. One day, almost a year after the accident, Ted brought me a letter from him. "You don't have to read it if you don't want to," said my brother. But I thought I should give it to you. I held the letter in my hand for hours, without the courage to open it. When I finally did, I found a trembling and irregular handwriting, the handwriting of someone who can barely hold a pen. It was a request for forgiveness. Long, confused, full of justifications about the alcohol, about the pain of losing our mother, about how he wasn't in his right mind. He said that in the clinic he had understood the harm he had done, that he would never drink again, that he wanted to see us, that we could be a family again. At the end, he wrote, "I know that what I did is unforgivable, but I need to say this, that accident. I remember you there. I remember your look. And as terrible as it was, I think it saved our lives. You had the courage I didn't have to break that cycle." I tore the letter into small pieces and threw it in the trash. I didn't need his forgiveness. I didn't need him to acknowledge what had really happened in the workshop that day. I didn't need anything more from him. My life now was in Philadelphia, with Ted, with the possibility of a different future, a future where I wouldn't need to feel afraid of anyone's hands. That's how, at 14 years old, I began my real life. It wasn't easy. There were nightmares, anxiety attacks, moments when something as simple as the smell of alcohol or the sound of a saw would make me panic. But there was also Ted, always by my side. There was Samantha and her unconditional friendship, even without knowing my whole story. There was Mrs. Rita, encouraging my writing, showing me that I could transform pain into something beautiful through words. And there was myself, stronger than I ever imagined I could be. A survivor. Someone who had the courage to do what needed to be done to free herself. Today, at 73 years old, sitting on my porch in Burlington, Vermont, I see how much life can change. Who would have thought that that frightened girl from Millfield would one day be here, serene, surrounded by love and peace? The path was long. I came to live here because of love. I met my August when I was 23 years old. He worked as an accountant in the same factory where Ted was still employed. It was Ted who introduced us at a year-end company party. August was 10 years older than me, already established in life, with a calmness and patience that won me over little by little. At first, it was difficult. I still carried the scars of the past, still was afraid of men, still woke up screaming in the middle of the night. But August never gave up on me. He waited, patient as only he knew how to be. When I finally told him my whole story, he just held my hands and said, "You're the strongest person I've ever met." We got married in 1975, me at 25 and him at 35. It was a small ceremony, just with the closest friends. Ted was my best man. He was already married to Ivy, whom he met in college. Yes, my brother managed to study, became an engineer. He was always the smart one in the family. Today they live in Portland, Oregon, and have 2 grown children. We talk every week on the phone. August was from Burlington and brought me here after the wedding. I fell in love with this city from the first day. There's something in the atmosphere here, in the way people are, that made me feel at home in a way I had never felt before. We bought our little house, small but comfortable, with a garden in the back where August planted a bit of everything. I worked as a secretary at a school for many years, while August continued in accounting. We didn't have children right away. The doctor said that the trauma I experienced in adolescence had left marks on my body as well, besides those I carried in my soul. But after 7 years of trying, our Martha was born, bringing a joy I didn't even imagine was possible. Martha was a blessing from her first cry, a healthy, strong girl, with her father's eyes, and they say, my smile. I raised her with all the love I didn't have at the same age, protected her like a lioness. Sometimes August would say I was too overprotective, but how could it be different? I knew what the world was capable of. My August passed away 12 years ago, a sudden heart attack. He was in the garden, tending to the roses he loved so much, when he simply fell. It was hard, very hard. But I had our Martha. I had our granddaughter Claire, who at the time was only 5 years old. I had a life built with so much effort to go on. Claire, my darling. Today she's already 17 years old, imagine, a beautiful, intelligent girl, full of dreams. It was she who encouraged me to start these videos, saying that my stories could help other people. At first I thought it was crazy, but she insisted so much that I ended up giving in. Grandma, you survived so much. Your story needs to be told, she would say. And it seems she was right, from the affection I receive from you with each video. My routine today is peaceful. I wake up early, make my tea, take care of my plants. 3 times a week I go to the church craft group, where I knit and crochet for donation. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I volunteer teaching literacy to adults at the community center. It's my way of giving back what Mrs. Rita did for me so many years ago, showing me that words can heal. Martha comes to visit me often. She lives just 20 minutes from here. Claire, well, she shows up almost every day after school. She sits here with me on the porch, tells me the news, teaches me to use this complicated cell phone, laughs at my difficulty with technology. As for my father, he died many years ago in the rehab clinic. I never saw him again after that day in the hospital. I learned from Ted that he never drank again after the accident, that he became a quiet and repentant man, that his hands never fully recovered. They became like immobile claws, unable to even hold a glass properly. For a long time, I carried the weight of what I did in that workshop. It wasn't regret, it was more a kind of silent guilt that accompanied me. Ted was the only one who knew the complete truth, and he never judged me. You did what needed to be done, he would say, when the subject came up. He destroyed our childhood. You ensured our future. With time, I learned to forgive myself. It wasn't easy. It took years of therapy. Yes, when I finally had the means, I sought professional help. Doctor. Nancy, my psychologist for more than a decade, helped me understand that 13-year-old girl was fighting for her life in the only way she could. Today, when I look back, I see not just the pain and horror of those years, but also the strength I discovered within myself, the ability to survive, to rebuild, to love despite everything. My house now is my refuge. Every corner has a bit of my history. The rocking chair that August gave me on our 30th wedding anniversary. The family photos on the walls, Martha as a child in her father's arms, Claire on her first day of school, Ted and I as adults, arm in arm, sincere smiles after so much struggle. The colorful crochet pieces I make, spread over the furniture. The garden I keep blooming all year round, even in winter. This is the life I built from the ashes of a past that tried to destroy me. A simple life, but full of meaning. A life where the hands that touch me only bring true affection, where night is no longer a source of terror, but of deserved rest. And that's what I'm most proud of. Not just having survived, but having learned to live fully, despite everything. My dears who have followed me this far, sharing this story wasn't easy. For many years, I kept this secret so deeply that I almost convinced myself it had happened to someone else, not to me. But I learned that silence only protects those who hurt, never those who were hurt. If you're going through something similar, or know someone who is, I want you to know, you're not alone. What happens behind closed doors, in the darkness of night, is not your fault. It never was. The shame doesn't belong to you, but to those who abused your trust, your body, your innocence. It took me decades to understand that girl from Millfield had no choice. That when the hands that should protect become the hands that hurt, something breaks inside us. A break so deep it seems impossible to repair. But it's not. Healing comes with time, with true love, with help. It comes when we find people who value us for who we are, not for what they can take from us. It comes when we learn to trust again, even thinking we would never be capable of it. In any country, in any culture, there are resources to help. Seek local authorities, protection organizations. Don't be afraid to speak. Your voice is stronger than you imagine. When I finally told my complete story to my psychologist, it was as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. We don't need to carry alone that which we didn't create. The hands that once hurt me could never touch anyone again. But my hands, oh, my hands had such a different destiny. With them, I rocked my daughter, caressed my granddaughter, hugged my husband, planted flowers, created beauty with crochet, wrote stories, held the hands of others who needed support. My hands built a new life from the ashes of the old one. You can too. No matter how dark the night is, dawn always comes. No matter how deep the well is, there's always a rope to climb. No matter how many times they told you that you're worth nothing, that was always a lie. When I look at the wrinkles on my hands today, I see a map of the battles I won, of the joys I conquered, of the love I gave and received. They are hands that knew the worst of humanity, but also the best. They are hands that survived, just like me. And you, my dear, who is listening to me now, I need you to do something very important. I need you to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell to receive all our stories of overcoming. These stories can save lives, can show someone who is suffering in silence that there is a way out. Each subscription is like an extended hand for someone who needs hope. And in the comments, leave the word "survived" if you watched until here. It's a powerful word, isn't it? A word I carry with pride, and that perhaps you carry too. A word that unites us, that shows we are stronger than what tried to destroy us. Do this now. Don't wait even one more minute. Your action can be the light that someone is looking for in the darkness. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for allowing me to transform my pain into something that can help. That is true healing, when our personal story becomes a bridge to the healing of others. Until the next video, my dears, God bless each one of you. The day I discovered my grandfather's secret, he forever lost what he valued most. That antique mirror didn't just reflect my body, it reflected his sick desire. When it was over, the ambulance took away only an empty shell of the man who once made me tremble. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my dear viewers. How wonderful it is to chat with you today. I'm Eleanor Miller, 72 years old, and living in Greenfield, Massachusetts, a town that welcomed me after life's many twists and turns. I was born in Charleston, South Carolina, but life brought me here almost 30 years ago, and I've made my peaceful corner here. These days, my greatest joy is tending to my herb garden. I grow basil, rosemary, mint, fennel, and so many others I can barely count them on my fingers. Each plant has a purpose, you know. Some are for seasoning food, others for making teas that cure everything from stomach aches to a heavy heart. My neighbors always come asking, "Miss Eleanor, do you have a tea for headaches?" Or, "Miss Eleanor, what would you recommend for this anxiety?" And I go out, pick the right herbs, explain how to prepare them, and see the relief on their faces afterward. This knowledge about medicinal plants began when I was just a little girl, with my grandmother Ruth, God rest her soul. She taught me the name of every plant in her yard, showed me how to harvest without harming the roots, how to dry the leaves just right. But after she passed, that knowledge stayed dormant inside me for many years. I only truly became interested again when I was in my 50s, after my children had grown wings and flown from the nest. From where I'm sitting on my porch, I can see my entire backyard. I have a wooden rocking chair that my late husband, George, made with his own hands. The floor is well-preserved wood that creaks a little when I rock. In front, I have ferns in pots that cascade down like green waterfalls. In the bed beside them, my herbs grow organized in small squares, their aroma mixed with the smell of fresh coffee that I always have in the thermos beside me. is the perfume of happiness for this old lady. Oh, my dears, before I continue, I'd like to ask a small favor. If you're enjoying my storytelling, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps bring this old lady's stories to more people. And you, my dears who are watching now, tell me in the comments, from which town are you watching? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with coffee, after lunch, or already in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take time out of your day to listen to Grandma's stories here. Tell me, okay? Let's create a chain of caring. Today I'm going to tell you a difficult story, one I've kept in my heart for many years. It's about a mirror that reflected more than just faces. It reflected secrets, pain, and in the end, liberation. It's about how, sometimes, we need to face our own reflections to find out who we really are. This story begins many years ago, when I was still a girl with braids and dreams, and how an object as simple as a mirror can hold so many painful memories, but can also be the path to liberation. It's a story of survival, my dears. A story about how sometimes we need to take the reins of our own lives, even when everything seems too dark. Prepare your heart, because this story isn't easy, but I promise that, like every storm that passes, there's always a rainbow at the end. Let's go back in time, to when I was just a girl, with the innocence that life hadn't yet taken from me. My childhood in Charleston was like a clear sky day that gradually becomes covered by dark clouds. At first, everything was light. I was born in 1953 in a simple but love-filled house near the harbor. My father, Jeremy, worked as a stevedore, loading and unloading the ships that arrived. He was a tall man with calloused hands and an easy smile. My mother, Lenora, was a woman of delicate beauty with dark hair that fell to her waist. She used to sing while sewing clothes for the wealthier families in town. It was just my younger brother Timmy and me. He was 3 years younger. Our house was small, made of wood, painted light blue, with a dirt yard where we played, and an old mango tree that gave us shade on hot summer days. On the living room walls, some black and white portraits told the story of our family. One showed my paternal grandparents, Oliver and Ruth, on their wedding day. Grandma Ruth was a wise and gentle woman. She was born in Pennsylvania and kept many traditions from her German ancestors, especially knowledge about herbs and natural remedies. She had a special way with plants, talked to them as if they were people. Plants are like children, she would say. They need love, attention, and discipline to grow right. Every Sunday we would have lunch at my grandparents' house, which was on the other side of town. It was a larger, older house, with a big plot in the back, where Grandma Ruth grew her herbs and vegetables. I remember the smell of sweet potato bread coming out of the wood stove, the fish stew with grits that she prepared with the sea bass Grandpa Oliver caught at the harbor. Life followed its natural course. I went to public school, played tag and hopscotch with the other kids on the street, helped Mom hang clothes on the line, learned from Grandma Ruth to recognize plants by smell and leaves. During the 4th of July, the entire town would be decorated, and we would dance at the central square with bonfires lit and colorful flags waving in the wind. During the town's Heritage Festival, which was Charleston's biggest celebration, I was enchanted by the processions, the parades, the Grand Marshal and Lady in their formal attire. But when I was 9, the first dark cloud appeared. Dad had an accident at the port. A steel cable snapped and hit several people, including him. He was bedridden for 3 months, unable to work. It was the first time I saw worry on my mother's face. Money started getting tight, and she began sewing until late at night to compensate. After Dad recovered, things were never the same again. He couldn't get the same job, started drinking more than he should. Arguments between my parents became frequent. I remember hiding under the covers with Timmy, covering his ears while we heard the shouting coming from the kitchen. It was during this time that I started spending more time at my grandparents' house. Grandma Ruth noticed when I was sad and would take me to the yard to teach me about plants. "Look at this one, Ellie," she would say, showing an herb with small leaves. "It's stonecrop. It looks weak, but it's strong enough to break kidney stones." Sometimes we need to be like this little plant, small but determined. When I turned 12, the biggest storm arrived. Mom suddenly fell ill. It started with coughs that wouldn't go away, then fever, weakness. The town doctor said it was tuberculosis, a disease that at that time was practically a death sentence for the poor. Within months, she wasted away before our eyes. Dad, who was already distant, dove deep into drinking. My mother's funeral was on a morning with a light drizzle. I remember the simple coffin, the white flowers, the pastor praying, and my father stumbling, being supported by friends from the port. Grandma Ruth hugged me on one side, holding Timmy on the other, while Grandpa Oliver remained silent, with a hard look I had never seen before. In the following months, life at home became unbearable. Dad barely showed up, and when he did, he was drunk, sometimes violent. He broke things, yelled at us. I, at 12, tried to care for Timmy and the house as best I could, but it was too much for a girl. That's when Grandma Ruth decided we would live with them. "You can't stay alone in that house anymore," she said one day, showing up with 2 empty suitcases. "Pack what you have, you're staying with us until your father straightens out." The move to my grandparents' house was like finding a safe harbor amid the storm. Grandma Ruth reorganized our lives. We started attending school regularly again, had schedules for studying, for helping with house chores, for playing. Grandpa Oliver was more reserved, stricter, but he respected her decisions. For almost a year, we lived like this, in a peaceful routine that was healing the wounds of losing Mom. Timmy started smiling again, behaving like a child. I grew even closer to Grandma Ruth, absorbing everything she taught me about plants, about life. Dad would show up from time to time, always promising he would straighten out, that he would soon come to get us, but he never kept his word. Then, when I was 13, came the second great loss. Grandma Ruth, who seemed so strong despite her age, suddenly fell ill. Unlike Mom, it was quick. A stroke, they said. One morning she couldn't get out of bed. The left side of her body wouldn't respond. Her speech was slurred. 3 days later, she was gone. Her funeral was very different from my mother's. People came from all over town, even from neighboring counties. People she had helped with her homemade remedies, with her advice, with her kindness. As the coffin was lowered into the ground, I noticed there was something different in my grandfather's eyes. It wasn't just sadness. It was something deeper, more disturbing. That same night, after all the visitors had left and Timmy was already asleep, Grandpa Oliver called me to the kitchen. He sat at the table, indicating I should do the same. His large, wrinkled hands held a cup of tea that had gone cold without him drinking it. "Eleanor," he said, in a voice I barely recognized, "things are going to change around here now. Timmy is going to your Aunt Celeste's house in Columbia. She's already agreed to take him in. As for you—" He paused, looking at me in a way that made me freeze inside. "You'll stay with me. You look a lot like your mother, you know. She was my only daughter, and now you're all I have left of her." At that moment, I didn't understand the weight of those words. I didn't understand why Timmy would be sent away while I would stay. I didn't understand what it meant to be all that was left of my mother for my grandfather. But something in the way he said it, in the way his eyes examined me, triggered an alert in me that I couldn't interpret. A week later, Timmy was taken to Columbia. I cried, hugging my little brother, promising we would see each other soon, that it was just for a while. But deep down, something told me that this separation would change our lives forever. And that's how, at 13, I was left alone in that big old house, with a grandfather who, with each passing day, seemed less like the man I knew before Grandma Ruth's death. The first days alone with Grandpa Oliver were strange, but not frightening. He seemed lost without Grandma Ruth, wandering around the house like a shadow, sometimes forgetting to eat meals. I tried to help as best I could, preparing what I knew in the kitchen: rice, a fried egg, a simple soup I'd learned from Grandma. He ate in silence, sometimes thanking me with a nod, and returned to his business. 3 weeks after Grandma Ruth's funeral, things started to change. It was a Friday afternoon. I had just returned from school. Grandpa Oliver was sitting in the living room with an old wooden box on his lap. When he saw me, he gestured for me to approach. "Sit here, girl," he said, pointing to the sofa beside him. I obeyed, curious about what that box might be. "This belonged to your mother," he continued, opening the lid carefully. Inside were some simple jewelry, hair ribbons, a wooden rosary, and a mother-of-pearl handled hairbrush. "Lenora was the most precious thing in my life," he said, his voice breaking a little. "When she was born, I swore nothing bad would happen to her as long as I lived." He took the brush and held it against the light coming through the window. "She had hair just like yours, you know, dark, straight, shiny. Sometimes she would spend hours getting ready in front of the mirror in her room." At that moment, he raised his eyes from the box and stared at me in a way that made my stomach turn cold. There was something hungry in that look, something that shouldn't be there. "Come with me," he said, suddenly rising. "I want to show you something." He took me to the room that had been my mother's when she was young. I already knew the room. It had an old wardrobe, a twin bed with a lace bedspread, a vanity with an oval mirror. The room was always closed. Grandma Ruth said it was to keep the memories preserved. Grandpa Oliver opened the door and made me enter. The air was stale, smelling of disuse. He turned on the light, a weak bulb that gave everything a yellowish tone, and closed the door behind us. He walked to the vanity, where there were several old perfume bottles, some hairpins, and a framed photo of my mother at 16. "This was her favorite mirror," he said, running his hand over the frame of the oval mirror. "She would sit here every night, brush her hair 100 times, I counted, and then say her prayers before sleep." He took the mother-of-pearl brush from the box and placed it on the vanity. Then he turned to me with a different look. "Eleanor, do you know you're the same age your mother was when this photo was taken?" he asked, pointing to the portrait. "It's amazing how alike you are." He picked up the photo and placed it next to my face, looking from the portrait to me and back to the portrait. The same eyes, the same face shape, even the same way of getting embarrassed when someone notices you. I tried to smile, uncomfortable, but there was something strange happening. Something in the way he compared, how his eyes traveled over my face, my body, as if he were trying to see someone else through me. "From today on," he said, putting the photo back on the vanity, "you'll use this room. It was your mother's room, now it will be yours. And every night, before bed, you'll sit here like she did and brush your hair 100 times, to honor her memory, to keep her presence alive in this house." "But Grandpa," I began to protest, "I like my room and—" "It's not a request, Eleanor," he interrupted, his voice hardening. "This is how it's going to be from now on. Your grandmother is no longer here to contradict me. In my house, I decide. And I've decided that you will keep your mother's memory alive. Understood?" I nodded, swallowing hard. There was something wrong with all this, but I was a 13-year-old girl, alone, with nowhere to go. That same night he came to the room to teach me the ritual. He said I should be dressed only in a white nightgown, like my mother wore. He handed me one that had been hers, kept in one of the drawers. It was too big for me, but he insisted I wear it. "Now sit in front of the mirror," he ordered, positioning himself behind me. I obeyed, trembling a little. "Take the brush and start combing, slowly, like she did." I started brushing my hair, embarrassed that he was there, watching my every move. In the mirror, I saw my reflection, and behind me, the figure of my grandfather, his eyes fixed on me. "Not like that," he said, irritated. He approached and took the brush from my hand. "Let me show you how she did it." He started brushing my hair, but there was something disturbing in the way he did it, as if he were caressing. His fingers touched my nape, my shoulders. I shrank instinctively. "Sit straight," he ordered. She had perfect posture, always upright, always elegant. I straightened my back, holding my breath. In the mirror I saw my pale, frightened face, and I saw his face changing, as if he were seeing someone else there, not me. "My Lenora," he murmured, and a shiver ran down my spine. It wasn't me he was looking at. It was the ghost of my mother that he imagined seeing through me. After brushing my hair, he simply put the brush on the vanity and said, "Tomorrow you do it by yourself. I'll come to check if you're doing it right." And he left, leaving me trembling and confused. For the following nights, the ritual continued. I brushed my hair in front of the mirror while he watched from the door. As the weeks passed, he began to bring more things that had belonged to my mother: a pink lipstick, a dress, a pair of ballet flats. "Try it on," he would say. "I want to see how it looks on you." With each new item, with each new ritual, his behavior became more disturbing. He began to ask me to change clothes in front of him. "It's to see if the dress fits right," he justified. I was reluctant, but he insisted, saying he was the head of the house, that I owed him obedience, that my father had abandoned us, and only he cared about me. When I turned 14, the ritual got even worse. He demanded that I change completely in front of the mirror while he watched, sitting in a chair in the corner of the room. I tried to cover myself, to turn my back, but he would yell when I did. "Turn to the mirror." She always looked in the mirror when she changed. With my back to him, facing the mirror, I would take off my clothes and put on the white nightgown, quickly, trying to expose myself as little as possible. But I felt his eyes on me all the time, and I heard his breathing changing, getting heavier. From the chair where he sat came sometimes a creak, a rhythmic movement. I kept my eyes fixed on my own face in the mirror, refusing to look at his reflection, refusing to understand what was happening there. After the ritual, I would lie in bed, curled up, and cry silently until falling asleep. In the first months, I wrote desperate letters to Timmy, to my father, asking for help. But Grandpa controlled the mail. No letter left that house. At school, I became quiet, withdrawn. I was ashamed, as if everyone could see what was happening inside those walls. As if I were stained by something dirty that wasn't my fault, but still consumed me. A teacher, Mrs. Wallace, noticed my change. One day after class, she called me to talk. "Is everything okay at home, Eleanor?" she asked, her kind eyes searching mine. I thought about telling her, about screaming the truth. But at the last moment, fear won. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Wallace," I lied. "I just miss Grandma Ruth." She didn't insist, but now and then she observed me with a worried look. Perhaps if I had told her, everything would have been different. But the fear of what might happen, of where they would send me, of how I would be far from Timmy, made me keep that horrible secret. Over time, I developed a defense mechanism. While I was in front of the mirror, under my grandfather's sick gaze, I would disconnect. My body was there, obeying his orders, but my mind traveled far away. I imagined I was in the yard with Grandma Ruth, learning about plants. Or at Charleston Beach, feeling the sand between my toes, the salty wind on my face. Anywhere but that room, that mirror that reflected my humiliation. And so, day after day, night after night, I lived in that silent nightmare, with no one to defend me, no one to save me. A prisoner of flesh and blood for the sick desire of a man who confused his granddaughter with the daughter he should never have desired in that way. Until, at 15, I found something that would change everything. What I found was a key. Small, old, hidden under a loose floorboard in the room. I discovered it by chance, when I dropped an earring and it rolled under the bed. As I looked for it, I noticed that one of the wooden boards wobbled. Curious, I lifted it, and there it was, a small brass key, tied to a piece of faded ribbon. For days I carried that key with me, hidden in a small cloth pouch that I sewed myself and attached to the inside of my clothes. I didn't know what it opened, but I felt it was important. It was my secret, the first thing Grandpa Oliver didn't control in my life since I began living that nightmare. Time passed, and the rituals in front of the mirror became more elaborate, more humiliating. It wasn't enough anymore to just change clothes and brush my hair. Grandpa began to bring makeup that had belonged to my mother. "Put on lipstick like she did," he would order. "The blush on your cheeks like this." And sometimes he himself would apply it, his trembling hands touching my face in a way that made me nauseated. There were days when he would drink before the ritual. On those nights it was even worse. He talked more, said things a granddaughter should never hear from a grandfather. "You're as beautiful as she was," he would mutter. "Sometimes, when I look at you, it's as if she had come back to me. My Lenora, my little girl." And then, there were moments when he came too close. He would stand behind me, so close I could feel his whiskey breath on my neck. His hands would rest on my shoulders, then slide a little, and I would close my eyes tightly, disconnecting completely, going to the safe place inside my head where none of that was happening. At school, my performance declined. I couldn't concentrate, living in a constant state of alert and exhaustion. Mrs. Wallace tried to talk to me again, this time more directly. "Eleanor, I'm worried about you," she said, sitting next to me during recess. "You were one of the best students, and now you can barely turn in assignments. Your eyes, they look so sad. If something's happening, you can tell me. I can help." I opened my mouth, thinking about telling everything. But then I remembered my grandfather's threats. "If you tell anyone, I'll say you're lying, that you're making up stories to get attention. And no one will believe you because I'm a respected man in this town. They'll send you to a boarding school or worse, and you'll never see your brother again." "It's nothing, Mrs. Wallace," I replied, forcing a smile. "I just haven't been sleeping well. I've been having nightmares." That, at least, wasn't a lie. When I turned 16, something happened that intensified my suffering even more. Timmy, my brother, came to visit us. Aunt Celeste brought him to spend a weekend in Charleston. He was different, taller, with his voice changing, no longer the little boy I knew. But his eyes were the same, gentle and curious. It was wonderful to see him, hug him, hear about his life in Columbia. He talked about school, friends, things Aunt Celeste let him do. He seemed happy, adjusted. I missed him so much it hurt, but at the same time, I was relieved that he was away from that house, that situation. On Sunday, before he left, we managed a few moments alone in the yard. He looked at me seriously, a very mature look for his 13 years. "Eleanor, are you really okay? You seem different, sad." I swallowed hard, holding back tears. I wanted so much to tell him, share that burden. But what good would it do? He was just a boy. He couldn't help me, and I didn't want to taint his new life with my horrors. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just missing you and Mom, and Grandma Ruth." He nodded, not totally convinced. "If you need anything, write to me, okay? Aunt Celeste always reads the letters you send." At that moment, I realized that Grandpa was intercepting not only the letters I sent, but also those Timmy sent me. One more control, one more isolation. I smiled at my brother, promising to write, knowing he would never receive my words. After Timmy's departure, Grandpa was in a bad mood. That night, the ritual was particularly humiliating. He brought a dress that had been Mom's, a party dress, light blue, with small pearls embroidered on the neckline. "Put it on," he ordered, throwing the dress on the bed. I obeyed, trembling. The dress was beautiful, but it caused a tightness in my chest to wear it. It was as if I were profaning her memory. "Now dance," he said, sitting in the chair. "Your mother loved to dance. At her 15th birthday party, she danced the waltz with me, dressed exactly like this." I froze, not knowing what to do. There had never been such an order before. "Dance!" he shouted, hitting the floor with his cane. I began to move, awkwardly, without music, just swaying from side to side, looking at the mirror and seeing the pathetic figure I was, a frightened girl in a dress too big, dancing to satisfy an old man's sick fantasy. "Not like that," he growled, getting up. He grabbed my hand forcefully, pulled me to him. "Like this." And he began to guide me in an imaginary waltz around the small room, squeezing my waist tightly, his breathing heavy and smelling of whiskey. I closed my eyes, disconnecting completely, letting my body be dragged around the room while my mind fled far, very far away. When he finally released me, I stumbled to the edge of the bed and sat, exhausted. He stood looking at me, his eyes cloudy with drink and something darker, more disturbing. "You'll never be like her," he muttered, a mixture of anger and disappointment in his voice. "You'll never have her grace, her beauty. You're just a pale imitation." And he left, slamming the door, leaving me there, still dressed in the party attire of a dead woman. That night, after he fell asleep, I heard his snores coming from the room across the hall. I made a decision. I needed to find out more about my mother, about what really happened to her. Maybe this would help me understand, find a way out of that hell. I remembered the key I had found. I began to test it on all the locked drawers in the house, on cabinets, on old trunks. Nothing worked. Until, on a night of insomnia, I had a flash. I looked at the oval mirror, at its ornate frame. There was a small lock on the back, almost imperceptible. With trembling hands, I fitted the key. It turned easily, as if it had been used recently. I heard a click, and to my surprise, the back of the mirror opened like a door, revealing a secret compartment. Inside was a stack of yellowed letters, tied with a faded red ribbon. I picked them up carefully, feeling the weight of those papers. I sat on the bed, turned on the small lamp beside it, and began to read. The first ones were love letters, exchanged between my mother and a man named Ernest. Passionate letters, full of plans for the future, for a life away from Charleston. My mother had a secret boyfriend, someone my grandfather clearly didn't approve of. "My dearest Ernest," one of the letters said, "I've already spoken to Mother about our plans. She supports us, but is afraid of Father's reaction. You know how controlling he is, how he never lets me breathe. Sometimes I'm afraid of him, of the way he looks at me when he thinks I'm not watching." I continued reading, my heart racing. In later letters, the tone changed, became more desperate. "We need to leave soon. I can't stand living in this house anymore. Father found out about you and made terrible threats. He said he would rather see me dead than see me with another man. I'm afraid, Ernest, afraid of what he might do." The last letter was the most disturbing of all, dated just 2 weeks before my mother's death. "My love, I need to tell you something that fills me with joy and fear at the same time. I'm expecting your child. Our girl, yes, I feel it's a girl, is already growing inside me. Mother is the only one who knows, and she swore to keep the secret. Father must never find out. We need to flee as soon as possible. Come get me on Friday, as we arranged. I'll be waiting at the usual place, with just the essentials. Let's start a new life, away from this place, away from him." I read and reread that letter, tears streaming down my face. My mother was pregnant when she died, with a child from a man who wasn't my father, a man named Ernest, whom she loved and with whom she planned to run away. What happened to her wasn't an accident, as they always told me. The sudden fever that took her in a few days, the rushed funeral without an autopsy, the heavy silence that fell over her death. My grandfather had found out. He discovered everything: the secret boyfriend, the pregnancy, the escape plans, and he didn't allow it. He preferred to see her dead than lose her to another man. That was when I understood the true extent of the horror in which I lived. I wasn't just suffering abuse. I was in the hands of a murderer. The man who probably killed my mother now kept me prisoner, using me as a perverse substitute for her. That night, after discovering the letters, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the revelations spinning in my mind like a whirlwind. My grandfather wasn't just a disturbed man with sick desires, he was a murderer. He killed my mother because he couldn't bear her loving another man, carrying another man's child. And I was under his complete power, alone in that isolated house, with no one to help me. If he was capable of killing his own daughter, what would stop him from doing the same to me if I confronted him? If I tried to escape? The next morning, I went down for breakfast, pretending nothing had changed. I served his coffee as I always did, put the bread on the table, smiled when necessary. But inside, I was different. The fear was still there, but now there was something more. A cold, calculating anger that grew with each hour. "You're quiet today," he commented, looking at me over the cup. "Just tired, Grandpa," I replied, avoiding his eyes. "I didn't sleep well." He grunted, returning his attention to the newspaper. That newspaper that always portrayed him as a respectable citizen of Charleston, a dedicated widower, a loving grandfather. The mask he wore for the world, while inside the house, he was a monster. In the following days, I continued the charade, obedient during the day, submissive during the nightly rituals. But while he watched me in front of the mirror, while I danced in dresses that had been my mother's, my mind worked, planning, calculating. The letters had mentioned an Ernest, the man my mother loved, the father of the baby she was carrying when she died. Could he still be living in Charleston? Did he know what had happened to her? I needed to find him, but how to do that without alerting my grandfather? The opportunity came on a Sunday afternoon, when Mr. Jenkins, an old friend of my grandfather's, came to visit. They sat on the porch to have coffee and talk about old times. I served them, silent as a ghost, when I heard Mr. Jenkins mention a name that made my heart leap. "I heard Ernest Hayes is back in town," he commented casually. "After all these years in Atlanta, he came back to take care of his sick mother. Strange, isn't it? After all that scandal with your girl, I thought he would never set foot in Charleston again." I saw my grandfather's face harden, his hands gripping the chair arms so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "Don't mention that name in my house," he said, voice trembling with contained rage. "Sorry, Oliver," Mr. Jenkins replied, clearly uncomfortable. "Didn't mean to bring up bad memories. Just thought you should know, in case you run into him around town." The conversation changed course, but that information kept hammering in my head. Ernest Hayes. He was alive. He was in Charleston. And apparently there was some scandal involving him and my mother, something the whole town knew about. That night, the ritual in front of the mirror was the worst of all. My grandfather had been drinking since the afternoon, after Mr. Jenkins left. When he called me to the room, his eyes were red, his voice more slurred than normal. "Today you'll wear this," he said, throwing a wedding dress yellowed by time onto the bed. "It was your grandmother's. Your mother never got to wear it, the ungrateful girl. She preferred to run away with that. His hands closed into fists, and for a moment I thought he was going to hit me. But he just threw himself into the chair, observing me with those eyes that seemed to burn. "Get dressed," he ordered. With trembling hands, I put on the wedding dress. It was far too big for me, dragged on the floor. The fabric smelled of mold, of the past, of secrets kept for decades. "Now turn to the mirror and say, 'I promise to be faithful to you, Oliver, all the days of my life.'" I froze, the horror of what he was asking hitting me like a punch. He wanted me to interpret not just my mother now, but also my grandmother. Or worse, he wanted me to be the bride that my mother never was for him. I can't do that, Grandpa," I whispered. He got up with a jump, surprisingly agile for a man his age. In 2 steps, he was beside me, holding my arm with enough force to leave marks. "You'll do what I tell you to," he growled, his face so close to mine that I could smell the whiskey breath. You owe me obedience. I raised you when your father abandoned you. I gave you a roof, food, education, and you will respect me. Like you respected my mother? The words came out before I could contain them. Like you respected her when you found out she was pregnant with another man's child? When she wanted to run away with Ernest Hayes? His eyes widened, first in shock, then in fury. The hand that held my arm closed even tighter. Where did you hear that name? Who told you about him? I read the letters, I confessed, raising my chin in defiance. The letters Mom hid behind the mirror. I know what you did to her. I know you killed her when you found out she was going to run away. It was as if a dam had broken. All the fear, all the anger, all the humiliations of those years exploded in my words. I was shouting now, not caring if the neighbors would hear, if the whole world would hear. You killed her, and now you want to turn me into her. You want me to be the daughter you lost, the woman you never had. His expression changed. The anger gave way to something colder, more calculating. He released me, taking a step back. You have no proof of anything, he said, his voice suddenly calm. Nobody would believe you. I'm Oliver Miller, respected by everyone in this town. And you? You're just a disturbed girl who lost her mother too early, a girl who makes up stories for attention. He walked to the door, turned to me one last time. And if you try to tell anyone at all, about your crazy theories or about our private moments, well, accidents happen, Eleanor. Like it happened to your mother. The door closed, and I collapsed on the floor, still dressed as a bride, trembling uncontrollably. His threat was clear. If I spoke, he would kill me, like he killed my mother, and no one would suspect him, the respectable widower, the dedicated grandfather. That night, I cried until I had no more tears. When the sun began to rise, I had made a decision. I couldn't continue living in that hell. I couldn't wait for someone to save me. I would have to save myself. I remembered something Grandma Ruth taught me years ago, when she showed me her herbs. Some plants heal, she would say. Others can do harm if used the wrong way. You need to know the nature of each one well. And then, a plan began to form in my mind. A plan that would require patience, care, and courage. If he could use my body as an object of his sick fantasies, I would use his own pride and vanity against him. My first action was to find Ernest Hayes. Not to ask for help. I had already decided this was a path I would walk alone, but to better understand what happened to my mother, to confirm my suspicions. For days, I made up excuses to go out alone. I needed to buy school supplies, I said, or do group work at a classmate's house. Small lies that gave me a few hours of freedom. I discovered that Ernest worked at a pharmacy in the town center, a middle-aged man, graying at the temples, sad eyes. On the first day, I just observed from afar. On the second, I gathered courage and entered the pharmacy, pretending I needed to buy something for a headache. When he helped me, his eyes widened as if he had seen a ghost. My God, he murmured, you're the spitting image of her. Of my mother, I confirmed in a low voice. Lenora. He turned pale, looking around to make sure we were alone in the store. You're her daughter. Eleanor, isn't it? How did you find me? I need to talk to you, I said urgently. About what happened to her, about my grandfather. He hesitated, clearly frightened, but ended up agreeing to meet me after his shift, on a bench in the church square where no one would find it strange for an adult and a teenager to be talking. And it was there, as the sun was setting, that Ernest told me everything. How he and my mother fell in love in secret. How my grandfather had always been possessive, controlling, with a sick jealousy of his only daughter. How they planned to flee when they discovered the pregnancy. But on the night we arranged to meet, she didn't show up, he said, his voice breaking with emotion. I found out later that she was sick, with a mysterious fever. And then... He couldn't finish, covering his face with his hands. You think he poisoned her? I asked directly. Ernest raised his face, looked into my eyes. I always thought so. Never could prove it. I tried to talk to the police at the time, but who would believe me against Oliver Miller? I was thrown out of the station, threatened. I ended up leaving Charleston. At that moment, all my suspicions were confirmed. I thanked Ernest for the conversation and got up to leave. "Eleanor," he called, "you're not safe in that house. Let me help. I can talk to the police. We can—" "No," I interrupted. "No one can help me now. But don't worry. I'll take care of everything." And it was with that determination that I returned home, ready to execute the plan that would forever change my life, and the life of the man who destroyed my mother and was trying to destroy me. My plan began to take shape meticulously. The meeting with Ernest gave me more than confirmation. It gave me access. When I told him vaguely that I needed a way to protect myself, he understood between the lines. As a pharmacist, he knew substances that I would never have access to alone. "I can't give you anything that would cause permanent damage," he said hesitantly. "That would be unethical and illegal. But I can give you something that causes enough discomfort for you to gain time and escape, if necessary." He gave me a small vial with a clear liquid. "This is a potent skin irritant. In direct contact, it causes redness, intense itching, a burning sensation. It's not lethal, but it's extremely unpleasant. Use it only in self-defense, Eleanor." I thanked him, but I knew that was just the beginning. What I was planning was more complex, more definitive. I didn't just want to escape. I wanted justice. I wanted him to never be able to do to another human being what he did to my mother and to me. At school, I began to pay more attention in chemistry classes. I asked the teacher questions about chemical reactions, about caustic substances. "It's for a special project," I explained, when he seemed surprised by my sudden interest. I took detailed notes, researched at the town library. At home, I began to observe more carefully my grandfather's hygiene habits. His vanity was his weak point. Even at 70, he prided himself on his appearance, on his hair still dark with few white strands, which I knew he secretly dyed. He had a strict routine. Every morning he would spend half an hour in the bathroom shaving, applying lotions, colognes. Among his products, there was a specific aftershave lotion he used daily, an amber liquid in a glass vial with a brass cap. It was imported, expensive, and he guarded it like a treasure. "It was your grandfather who taught me to be a gentleman," he would sometimes say when visitors commented on his pleasant smell. "A man of respect takes care of his appearance." That lotion would be my means. For weeks, I worked discreetly. On afternoons when I had permission to go to the library, I diverted my path to Ernest's pharmacy. He provided me with small quantities of substances that, in isolation, were harmless, but which, combined in the right way, would produce the effect I sought. "Don't tell me what this is for," he would say, handing me the vials in a discreet bag. "Just promise me you're safe." "I am," I would answer, "or I will be soon." In the yard of the house, I reactivated the small herb garden that Grandma Ruth maintained. "I want to learn more about the plants she loved," I explained to my grandfather when he questioned. He liked the idea, seeing in it a way for me to be more feminine, more like my grandmother and my mother. Little did he know that among the innocent herbs, mint, rosemary, basil, I cultivated some more potent species whose extracts would be crucial ingredients in my formula. In a common school notebook, disguised as biology notes, I recorded my experiments. I tested small quantities on leaves, on pieces of fabric, observing the reactions. I adjusted the proportions, refined the mixture. It needed to be perfect, strong enough to cause the damage I intended, but not so obvious that it would seem a deliberate attack. The ideal opportunity came in June 1970, when I turned 17. My grandfather, in one of his rare gestures of false kindness, decided to give me a present, an entire day in town, alone, with some money to spend. "You've been a good girl, obedient," he said. "You deserve a reward." What he didn't know is that I would use that day to finalize my preparations. I bought a small vial identical to his aftershave lotion. I briefly met with Ernest, who gave me the last component I needed. "Eleanor, are you sure you don't want me to intervene?" he asked, concern evident on his face. "I can talk to the authorities. I can take you away from here." "No, Ernest," I replied firmly. "This is my battle, and it's almost over." That night, I executed the final part of the plan. After my grandfather fell asleep, helped by a special tea I prepared with an herb that induced deep sleep, I silently entered his bathroom. With steady hands, I replaced the contents of the aftershave lotion with my mixture. The liquid had the same color, the same appearance, but its effects would be completely different. I returned to my room, the room that once was my mother's, and waited, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at the oval mirror that had witnessed so many humiliations. For the first time in years, I felt no fear looking at that mirror. I felt power. The next morning, I woke up early but remained in the room, waiting. I knew exactly when my grandfather would enter the bathroom, when he would start his morning routine. I knew the exact moment when he would apply the lotion. The scream came precisely at the time I expected, a sound I had never heard before coming from my grandfather's throat. It wasn't of anger nor authority, as I was used to. It was a scream of pure pain, of panic. I left the room, pretending to be frightened by the noise. I saw my grandfather staggering out of the bathroom, hands clutching the lower part of his body, face contorted in an agony that gave me a satisfaction I've never confessed to anyone until today. "What is it, Grandpa?" I asked, with perfect innocence. "What happened?" He couldn't speak, just moaned, trembling. His face was red, sweaty, eyes wide with pain and confusion. "I'll call for help," I said, running to the phone. The ambulance arrived in less than 20 minutes. The paramedics found him still on the floor, semi-conscious from pain. They asked questions that I answered with as much vagueness as possible. "I don't know what happened. He was in the bathroom, shaving as always, and then I heard the scream." At the hospital, the doctors were perplexed. "It looks like a severe allergic reaction," one of them said, "but I've never seen anything like it. There are signs of chemical burns in the genital region and, well, the damage is extensive." I stayed by his bed in the hospital, playing the role of the dedicated and concerned granddaughter. When we were alone, however, I leaned close to his ear and whispered, "I know what you did to my mother. This is for her. And for me. You will never use your masculinity to hurt anyone again." His eyes widened, finally understanding, but he was too weak, too doped up on painkillers to react. The official diagnosis was severe allergic reaction to personal hygiene product, complicated by chemical burn. The doctor explained that sometimes ingredients in beauty products can undergo alterations over time, becoming irritating or even caustic. "Especially these imported products, without proper inspection," he added. The most serious part, which was only revealed to me as the closest relative, was that the damage was permanent. The tissues in the genital region had suffered such severe necrosis that any sexual function would be impossible from then on. In addition, there would be loss of control over urination, requiring the use of medical devices for the rest of his life. "I'm sorry, miss," said the doctor in a solemn tone. "Your grandfather will never be, well, the same man again." I nodded, pretending sadness, while inside I felt only a cold calm. Justice had been done. Not in the way society would approve, but in the only way possible under the circumstances. He would continue to live. I'm not a murderer like him, but he would have to live with a constant humiliation, a daily reminder of his crimes. My grandfather was hospitalized for almost a month. When he finally was discharged, he returned home like a shadow of the man he had been. He would sit for hours on the porch, staring at nothing, barely speaking. The pride, the arrogance, the power he displayed, all gone. The mirror ritual never happened again. He could barely look at me now, would avert his eyes when I entered the room. Our roles had reversed. Now I was the one with power, and he was the one who feared. I continued to care for him, for appearances. The entire town commented on how dedicated I was, how admirable the way I took care of my poor grandfather after his accident. No one suspected the truth. No one except Ernest, who kept our secret until the end. 6 months after the incident, I received a letter from Aunt Celeste. My brother Timmy, still 13, had received a scholarship to a boarding school in Richmond. She asked if I would like to move to Columbia, live with her while I finished my studies. "I imagine it's hard to take care of your grandfather alone in the condition he's in," she wrote. "There's room for you here, and we could hire someone to help with his care." The offer was tempting, but I had other plans. I replied thanking her, but explaining that I needed to stay in Charleston. What I didn't say is that I wasn't finished with what I started. On an October afternoon, after the nurse who came daily to take care of my grandfather had left, I sat beside him on the porch. He was in the wheelchair, looking at the garden that I now cultivated alone. "Grandpa," I said, my voice calm, controlled, "I want you to know something. I found Ernest Hayes." He slowly turned his head toward me, his eyes revealing fear for the first time. "He told me everything about Mom, about the baby she was expecting, about how you poisoned her when you found out she was planning to flee." My grandfather opened his mouth to deny it, but I interrupted him. "Don't worry, I won't report you to the police. I don't have concrete evidence. It would be your word against mine. And besides..." I paused, smiling softly. "I think you're already paying for what you did." I stood up, adjusting the shawl on my shoulders. "I'm moving to Columbia next month. I've already arranged for a nurse who will live here, take care of you full-time. She's very competent, but she's not family, so she won't have the same patience that I have with your special needs." His eyes filled with tears, of anger, of fear, of shame, I can't say. For the first time in my entire life, I saw my grandfather cry. "One last thing," I added, leaning closer. "That mirror in Mom's room? I had it removed this morning, donated it to a thrift store in town. Someone will buy it, take it home, use it to admire themselves, and you will never be able to use it for your perversions again." I turned my back and entered the house, feeling a weight being lifted from my shoulders. It was done. The cycle of abuse that began with my mother, that continued with me, was finally broken. In November 1970, I moved to Columbia to live with Aunt Celeste. For the first time in years, I felt free. I finished high school, got a job as an assistant in a local pharmacy, an irony that didn't escape me. I reconnected with Timmy during holidays, slowly rebuilding our sibling relationship. As for my grandfather, I learned that he lived 7 more years in that house in Charleston, a broken man, without the strength or the will to continue his evils. When he died in 1977, I went to the funeral, not out of respect or mourning, but to make sure that chapter of my life was definitely closed. Ernest was also there, discreet, keeping his distance. We exchanged just a look, a nod. Words weren't necessary between us. After the funeral, I sold the house in Charleston. I used the money to establish myself better, continue my studies. Eventually, I graduated in pharmacy, following in the footsteps of the man who, in a way, helped me conquer my freedom. And that's how, my dears, I managed to escape the cycle of abuse and control that almost destroyed my life, just as it destroyed my mother's. It wasn't an easy path, nor always one that others would understand. But it was the path I found to survive, and eventually, to live. Today, at 72, I live a quiet life here in Greenfield. My little corner of peace, as I like to call it. The town welcomed me almost 30 years ago, when I moved here with my late husband, George. He was a forest engineer and received an offer to work in conservation at the Green Mountain National Forest, not far from here. We came thinking we would stay a few years, but ended up falling in love with the place, the people, the pace of life. And we stayed. George left us 8 years ago, from a sudden heart attack. It was hard, very hard. We had been married for over 30 years, built a life together. I met him in Boston, where I went to work after graduating in pharmacy. He came into the pharmacy where I worked looking for something for allergies. We talked, he invited me for coffee, and from that coffee was born a love story that lasted until his last day. My 2 children are grown, with their own families. Gabriella, the eldest, lives in Hartford with her husband and my 2 teenage grandchildren, Helen and Philip. She followed an academic career, is a university professor of botany. I think she inherited a bit of my passion for plants, but in a more scientific way. Daniel, my youngest, lives farther away in Portland. He's a pediatrician, married to Robert. The 2 adopted a girl, Lucy, who is now 6 years old and is the joy of my days when she comes to visit during vacations. My daily routine is simple, but satisfying. I wake up early with the birds singing. I prepare my coffee, sit on the porch to watch the sun rising behind the maple trees. Then, I go to my herb garden. It's my sacred corner, where I feel connected to nature, to my roots, to the memory of my grandmother Ruth. The knowledge about medicinal plants, which began as a childhood curiosity alongside my grandmother, became my true vocation after I retired from the pharmacy. I started studying more deeply, reading books, taking courses. Today, I have a small notebook where I note all the properties of each plant, the possible combinations, the preparation methods. The neighbors here in the neighborhood already know, when they have a health problem, they come to talk to me first. Miss Eleanor, I have a terrible migraine. Miss Eleanor, my digestion is awful. Miss Eleanor, I can't sleep properly. And there I go to the garden to pick the right herbs, prepare the teas, the infusions, the compresses. I don't charge anything for this. I do it out of love, out of gratitude for the life I have today. 3 times a week, I give volunteer classes at the neighborhood community center. I teach younger women about the healing power of plants. It's knowledge that can't be lost, I always say. Our grandmothers knew, our mothers forgot, and now it's up to us to rescue this wisdom. On Sundays, I go to Mass at St. Peter's Church nearby. I'm not devout, but I find comfort in faith, in community. After Mass, there's always a collective coffee in the parish hall. The ladies bring cakes, pies, homemade cookies. I bring my cornbread with fennel, which everyone loves and always asks for the recipe. Once a month, I receive a visit from my friend Margaret. We met in the town's craft group over 20 years ago. She does crochet, I do embroidery. We spend the afternoon chatting, laughing at ourselves, remembering old stories, commenting on the town's news, which isn't much, to be honest. It's a type of friendship that can only be earned with the years, with maturity. On special dates, like Christmas or birthdays, my children come to visit with their families. The house becomes full, noisy, alive. I cook for days, preparing all the favorite dishes of each one. I see my grandchildren growing, becoming more independent with each visit. Helen, the oldest, has already asked me to teach her about herbs. "Grandma, I want to learn everything you know," she said the last time. My heart filled with joy hearing that. Of all the things I've achieved in life, peace is what I value most. Peace of mind, peace in the heart. I went through terrible moments, it's true. I carried burdens too heavy for a girl, faced demons that many couldn't imagine. But I survived. Not just survived. I learned to live fully. When I look back at that frightened girl in front of the mirror, I feel a deep compassion. I wish I could hug her, tell her everything would be all right in the end. That she would find love, build a family, have a meaningful life. The past left scars, I can't deny. Even today, I have difficulty with large mirrors. I prefer the small ones, just functional. My house doesn't have full-length mirrors, and even the smaller ones are in discreet places, never highlighted. It's a small adjustment I make to maintain my serenity. I also never managed to establish a close relationship with my father after everything. He continued his life erratically, rarely appearing, always with promises he didn't keep. But I made peace with this absence, understood that he too was a victim, in his way, of circumstances and his own weaknesses. With my brother Timmy, the story was different. We rebuilt our bond over the years. He lives in Denver today, is a retired math teacher. We talk every week by phone, and once a year he comes to visit me, or I go there. When we're together, it's as if the years of separation never existed. Life taught me that true strength isn't in revenge, although sometimes it seems the only path possible. True strength is in the ability to rebuild, to flourish even after the worst storms. Like those plants in my garden that, after being drastically pruned, come back stronger, more beautiful. And that's the lesson I carry with me every day as I care for my herbs, my flowers, my simple and blessed life here in Greenfield. My dear viewers who have stayed with me until here, I want to leave you with some words from the bottom of my heart. If you are going through difficult times, through abuse, through situations that seem to have no way out, know that you are not alone. In every corner of this world, there are people willing to extend a hand, to listen, to help. I learned through pain that silence only protects those who hurt us. Today, unlike in my time, there are stronger laws, there are support networks, there are people prepared to believe you. Please, don't keep to yourself what hurts you. Seek help, even if it seems frightening, even if it seems impossible. You know, when I was just a girl trembling in front of that mirror, I thought I would never feel joy in life again. I thought the shadows of the past would always chase me. But I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine. That life, no matter how hard it is at times, always offers new chances, new paths. The mirror that reflected my pain for so many years ended up becoming a symbol of liberation. When I got rid of it, it was as if I were getting rid of the invisible chains that bound me to that house, that man, that past. The pain we carry can destroy us or transform us. It can turn us into bitter, distrustful people, or it can give us a special sensitivity to recognize suffering in others and extend a hand to help. The choice is ours. The path I chose wasn't perfect, wasn't one that authorities or society would approve. It was the possible path for a girl without options, without support, without a way out. Today, decades later, I see that there are other possibilities, other resources. If you're hearing my story and identifying with it, seek those resources. Seek the help that I didn't have. In any country, in any culture, abuse is a violation of the most basic human rights. No one has the right to use their power to hurt, control, or humiliate another person. No one has the right to steal your dignity, your voice, your future. When we plant seeds in the garden, we know not all will germinate. Some will be carried by the wind, others will be eaten by birds. But those that find fertile soil, water, and sun, they grow and blossom, sometimes in ways we can't imagine. Our life is like that. Even in the worst circumstances, the seeds of hope, resilience, inner strength are there, waiting for the right moment to sprout. Today, I look at my herb garden and see in it proof that life always finds a way. Even after the harshest winter, spring comes, bringing new leaves, new flowers, new possibilities. So, my dear, don't give up. Don't allow the shadows of the past to steal the light of your future. You are stronger than you imagine, more resilient than you believe. And you deserve a full, safe, happy life. And to all who watched me until here, I ask a special favor. If this video touched your heart, if my story made sense to you, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Each subscription is like a little seed planted. It's like saying that stories like mine matter, that they can help other people who are going through difficult times. Do it now, don't wait even one more minute. And leave in the comments the word rebirth, just so I know who stayed with me until the end of this journey. Let's create together a chain of support and hope, because no one should face life's storms alone. Thank you for listening to me, for giving me a few minutes of your time. May God bless each one of you, and may the peace I found after so many struggles also find a place in your hearts.